Thank you so much, Liam. Yeah, I think this is a really great question for this next session. How do we build a better world? Because that's exactly what I'm hoping we all at CAFOD will be doing over the next year throughout 2021. For those of you who don't know me, which is probably most of you because I only joined CAFOD in April, my name is Aisha. I'm the new head of campaigns. I'm absolutely delighted to see so many people still here. It's nearly 3 o'clock and there's still hundreds of you on the call. I'm just so sad that I've not been able to meet you all in person since starting the job. But it's really great to know that you're all out there and up for getting involved in our campaigns over the next year, because we definitely have a lot of work to be done over the next year. So I'm really excited to talk to you about what some of the campaigning plans are for the next year. So we've decided for the next year we're going to call our campaign Reclaim Our Common Home. So I'm just going to take some time now to explain what that means. As you're all aware, this last year we've lived through the worst global health crisis of a century. Lives have been lost, families have been devastated, and communities have been torn apart. But the economic consequences for the world are set to be catastrophic. So the latest figures from the World Bank say that there's around 150 million people will fall into extreme poverty as a result of the pandemic. Now that's roughly that's roughly twice the population of people living in the UK who will face extreme poverty as a result of this pandemic. And the virus is causing a hunger crisis of historic proportions. Hunger levels were already on the increase before the pandemic hit. And now we're looking at an extra 130 million people going to be facing hunger as a result of this pandemic. We already had a world where 8 billion people were facing hunger, which is, of course, I think we all agree, completely unacceptable in 2020. So, and at the same time, the world continues to warm at unprecedented levels. Extreme weather events are becoming more frequent, and the window to tackle the climate emergency continues to shrink. So if we are going to tackle these interconnected crises of poverty, inequality, injustice, and climate change, then it's absolutely certain that we cannot return to the pre-pandemic world. Pope Francis makes this really clear in Fratelli Tutti when he said, "The world itself is crying out in rebellion." And I think that for us, and for us as campaigners, especially if we're to listen to that cry, it means we cannot return to the status quo of the pre-pandemic days. We cannot return to the status quo that led us to this climate emergency, to the status quo that allowed the world's resources and wealth and power to be accumulated into the hands of a few individuals. A situation so extreme, such a grotesque level of inequality that the current figures, and the Oxfam put inequality figures out every year, and the latest figures show that just 26 individuals own half the world's wealth. 26 is a fraction of the people that are on this call today, and they hold half of the planet's wealth. So we cannot return to that status quo. Instead, we need to reclaim our common home and rebuild it on new values of justice and equality, solidarity, hope, and harmony with nature. And so that is the framing for what we're going to be campaigning on next year. We want to reclaim nature so that everyone has a clean environment, so that they can breathe clean air and live safe from climate disaster. And we want to be focusing on reclaiming power so that people can have control over their lives, access to decent jobs, and live free from corporate abuses. And we want to reclaim the world's lands and resources so that the wealth is no longer concentrated just in the hands of those 26 people, but instead all of us and all of our brothers and sisters around the world have the chance to live in dignity. So if we are to do this, which is like a really ambitious goal and really, really important, we have to make sure that next year is a year of transformation. And it's our government, the UK government, that has a really, really crucial role next year. And Neil spoke a bit about why 2021 is so important to this, to the world. And the UK next year is hosting 2 major international conferences where big decisions about world politics will be made. So in the summer, we've got the G7 meeting taking place in the UK, where the leaders of the most kind of powerful and wealthiest nations will be coming to the UK to discuss how the world should rebuild from the pandemic. And then later in the year, we've got the COP26, the UN climate talks, where world leaders from every country will come to Glasgow to work out what steps are needed to tackle climate change. So that means the eyes of the world next year will be on this country. They'll be on Britain, looking at what we're going to do to deliver. So we need to come together as citizens of this country and as Catholics to raise our voice and make sure that our government listens. I think we all have a duty and a responsibility to our global family to ensure that the government uses this moment to bring in those changes that I mentioned earlier, to bring in a more just and sustainable world. And so then, if I just spend a moment to conclude by talking specifically what that means for us as in CAFOD's campaigning over next year. So firstly, on climate issue, we're going to be pushing the government to deliver a COP that addresses the scale of the climate emergency, that limits warming to 1.5 degrees and provides adequate support for the poorest nations. After all, those are the countries that have done the least. And, Neil talked a lot about that in his talk earlier. And we'll also be campaigning to demand that the Prime Minister finally ends the UK's support to fossil fuels overseas, because there's no justification for us, for this country, to be supporting oil and gas expansion across countries in the global south. We have to urgently reduce our fossil fuel consumption, not expand it. So secondly, for our campaigns, we're going to continue campaigning for debt cancellation, because we need to ensure that low and middle income countries have the resources they need to recover from the pandemic. I think this is a really crucial area of our campaigning, because as fantastic as charity and aid is, it's never going to be the solution to the world's problems. It's never going to be enough to give money in charity and aid if we leave the unjust global economy and financial system in place. So it is completely immoral that in the middle of a global pandemic, we find ourselves in a situation where some countries are paying more on debt payments to private banks and wealthy nations than they are on their health systems. And that's why we have this year, thanks to everyone who got involved, been campaigning really hard on debt cancellation. So it's really important that we make sure that debt cancellation is really central part of the recovery from the pandemic. And so we'll be continuing to push the Chancellor, the World Bank, the IMF, the G20, banks, every target we can to try and achieve that debt cancellation. And thirdly, for our campaigns, we're going to continue to make sure that businesses also play their role in how we recover from the pandemic. So we're going to continue to stand in solidarity with our partners overseas, where human rights and environmental defenders who are fighting back against corporate abuses are often, being targeted. And, thanks to everyone who's already involved in our Messages to the Brave campaign, we'll be continuing solidarity work as part of this Reclaim Our Common Home campaign. And here in the UK, we'll also be pushing the government to ensure that relevant legislative change comes into place to keep businesses accountable for their operations throughout the supply chain. So there's three focuses to our campaign, which is climate, debt justice, and corporate accountability. And so there's loads to do, got really big ambitions for what we're going to try and achieve next year. It really, really is an important year. And I just, really so excited to see so many people on this call, and excited that we're all going to work together. We know, if we look at how change happens throughout history, we know that change happens when people come together, raise their voices collectively, and let it be known that, together we really can change things. So I really, hope that next year we'll all be campaigning together to bring about this change.